Yes, hello everyone. Welcome to our session, Accelerating Rail Connectivity Through Guarantee Solutions. I'm Elena Paley. I'm a Global Sector Manager for Infrastructure at MIGA, and I will be moderating this panel. I have today with me a few distinguished guests, including Ravshan Rustamov, the Chairman of Azerbaijan Railways, Andrés Santana, Manager of Climate Department at BNDES Brazil, and Diep Nguyen Van Hout, IFC's Senior Manager for Climate, previously deeply engaged in the rail sector. And later in the program, we also will be joined by Nicolas Pelletier, World Bank Global Director for Transport. He will be making closing remarks. Well, we all know that railways are critically important for climate agenda. Switching from other means of transportation for both passengers and freight, from roads to airways to rail connectivity can generate up to 70% of greenhouse gas emission reduction. And this is without electrifying the networks or greening the networks. Rail connectivity has also a lot of developmental impacts. It provides cost-efficient ways of mobility, long-term logistics. It also can unlock potential of industries such as agribusiness and mining. But rail sector requires a lot of capital. It's heavily capital intense. It is estimated that full switch to rail connectivity would require $300 billion per year investments, although this is a global number, but it's a significant pressure on governments and SOE's budget, particularly in low and kind of a lower middle income countries. So attracting private financing and private capital in this sector becoming critically important to unlocking full climate potential of the sector. And it's challenging, particularly in some markets, because some of the state-owned companies don't have credit ratings that require for them to raise capital in the market, and access to credit enhancement, to guarantees, to other financial instruments remains a problem. That's why the World Bank Group just recently reorganized the guarantee business, creating a unified guarantee platform. So all the products that were separately issued by IFC, by IBRD, by MIGA are combined under a single platform, providing simpler and easier access for our private and public sector clients to guarantees and credit enhancement. The platform also creates a basis for innovation when using multiple products can result in higher private sector mobilization at lower costs. I'll stop here and I ask my first question to Diep. Could you please describe what IFC is doing in this sector and how IFC can help to mobilize private sector capacity, and what instruments would be required to do so?
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today. Look, IFC's climate strategy includes decarbonizing the 5 key systems. That includes energy, transport, manufacturing, agriculture, and the urban environment. And within transport accounts for about a quarter of GHG emissions, global GHG emissions. And so in order to decarbonize the transport sector, we need to electrify as many modes as possible. And the railway sector is one of them. And you know, I've worked in several railways in emerging markets. And what I've found in these railways is in emerging markets is they tend to be owned by the government. They're state-owned enterprises. The fares are subsidized, and they tend to be financially unsustainable. Most of them are not creditworthy without government support. And so because of these, it is quite challenging to modernize them, to get investments, to modernize and to electrify. And most of the electrification in the world, about a third of the railway network in the world is electrified. Most of them are electrified in China and in Europe. So the opportunities to electrify are in emerging markets and the US, but we don't finance the US. So in emerging markets, where IFC works for railways in particular is we would use our advisory services, our transaction support, to help governments structure PPPs or structure concessions that can bring in private sector investment. But again, there are challenges to this. Governments have to be willing to open up the rail sector to private sector investment, and sometimes you can have PPP structures where the government still owns the railways, but the operator is a private sector company. We've done that in several emerging markets. So again, the government has to be willing to liberalize the sector, allow private sector investment, but the challenges are you have to solve the fact that many of these railways are not creditworthy, not financially sustainable. So how do you solve that problem?
Okay, well, thank you very much. And now I'll come back to you on concessions, but focusing on financing for SOEs. We have Ravshan with us, who is representing a state-owned company. So maybe you can speak briefly about your company, the plans to expand and electrify your networks, and maybe mention also the challenges associated with securing financing, particularly on favorable terms and conditions.
Thank you. First of all, good morning, all guests. I don't know how it is easy to start this hard topic early morning. Just for your ice breaking this morning. Railway, of course, is the more sustainable means of transport. We understand it, and we understand, but at the same time, we accept it as that we are not the unconcerned to the climate topic. Of course, we understand that the railway sector is a more sustainable, but it is not a chance for us, but at the same time, it's a responsibility for us. It should be more in order to be a more sustainable society. Of course, what about investment? Of course, railway sector, as I mentioned, as a means of the sustainable means of transport, is heavily required the investment, capital investment, because railway sector is a sector where you should invest heavily, but the return of this investment is requires a long term. We are actively using different kind of investments, international financial organizations, by the way, World Bank, ADB, Asian Development Bank, other international financial institutions is the active lender of the credit for ADB, Azerbaijan Railways. But the main source of the investment now in Azerbaijan is the Azerbaijan government. I hope in other countries also, if the government doesn't support the railway sector, it's harder to believe that this sector will be developed appropriately. At the same time, Azerbaijan Railways started to be the investor, even itself investor. And starting the last year, we have some investment projects. It's the new era for Azerbaijan Railways. Always Azerbaijan Railways consumed the investment, but now we started even to be actively to be an investor role. What about the challenge shortly? Of course, we understand that as the experienced company in credit, let's say the absorbing company, we understand that each company should be ready for this credit. Of course, first of all, you should make your feasibility correctly, your due diligence is required. If your due diligence, your feasibility is not appropriate, of course, you will be maybe in the execution or maybe after completion of this project, you will meet some troubles how to give back these credits, of course. For me, the second challenge is accountability. How a company efficiently use these resources. You should have enough accountability points, arguments, factors. For example, you should have international financial accounting standards. You should be audited by well-known audited companies. Otherwise, it is not efficient. And at the same time, it's not good for the lenders. It's how efficiently they utilize these resources. The last point, last challenge for me is the internal capacity of the company, internal readiness, let's say, for this absorption of this credit. If the company is not ready for technically, human resources are not sufficient, of course, any credit will be useless. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. So there are opportunities to get private sector involved under sort of concessionary or PPP arrangements, but project preparation is a critical part. And also the readiness of the state-owned company is critically important, because being a counterparty to a private sector gives you certain responsibilities, but at the same certain controls that you can exercise when things go wrong. Well, thank you very much. I'll come back to you on funding, specifically using private market. But my next question is to Andre. Brazil is one of the few middle-income countries where railway and metro companies have accessed substantial amount of private financing. Could you share with us your experience and explain how this was achieved, what instruments have been used, and what role BNDES have played in making it possible?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure. Well, I'm going to talk about railways and then can say a little bit more about metro. I think in Brazil, 10% of our GHG emissions come from transport, mainly from roads. So we have also an important challenge, having more railways. And I think that an important thing in Brazil is, as you said before, railways demand very high capital investment. So in order to be financeable, to be economically feasible, we have to have long routes, a permanent and planning set of commodities that will be in these railways, and with a heavy load. So what's happening in Brazil, we have these with iron ore and soybeans. So basically, it's part of it's not exactly, but it's kind of a vertical integration of two very important sectors in Brazil that export a lot. So it's very linked to our exports. And these are financeable. These we have achieved ways of financing and being economically feasible. However, railways to transport people, we did not achieve. It's still very challenging because we have a huge country, and then it's much harder to have people flowing and having income for railways to finance these kind of transportation. As regards metro, we have some important cities with, for example, São Paulo has 12 million people, Rio has 6 million people that demand daily transportation. And we have achieved, and BNDES has had an important role in designing concessions, structuring, and also financing these. And we have some, we've had these, like 15 years ago, some different, for example, we have bonds incentivized with tax-free bonds for infrastructure that have also helped bringing private investments to the sectors.
Thank you very much. So again, concessions and PPPs, but with proper project preparation and development institutions can play a critical role in that, but also mentioning access to the bond market, which could be another great source of financing for rail companies. Recently, MIGAD issued around $500 million equivalent guarantees in support of commercial bank financing for Kazakhstan Rail Company, KTZ. The funds were used for what we call the green asset classes. So it's basically a capital expenditure program focused on acquisition of electric rolling stock, electric locomotives, but also greening up the network, electrifying the tracks, improving efficiency. And because of MEGA guarantees, KTZ was able to borrow these funds on longer terms and at lower cost and in currency that they would like to borrow. In this particular case, is Swiss francs. So we would like to scale up this experience and offer these products to other SOEs. So coming back to you, Ravshan, you mentioned that the source of funding for your company is primarily the government budget, but also DFIs, right? There are no institutions such as World Bank, IFC, and so forth. Do you see any opportunities to getting access to commercial bank financing on longer terms? And what sort of instruments you see valuable in order to improve your creditworthiness and get you better terms and conditions in the market?
Okay, sure. As a type of investment, of course, as I mentioned, the government budget, government resources, but commercial banks also is the source of resources for us. This year we have good cooperation with the Azerbaijan International Bank, the Commercial Bank of Azerbaijan, and we completed the commercial project. Excuse me. We know that commercial banks also is the good source of investment. Of course, it's not compared with the international financial organization. Of course, it's not it's not feasible always, but it's a type of investment we try to use often.
Thank you very much. So I'm coming back to you, Andrei, and just wanted to get your opinion on what innovative structures or sort of creative financial solutions are going to be important for rail sector and metro sector in Brazil. In this forum, we've been talking about green bonds, we've been talking about carbon finance. Do you see any of these instruments to be becoming an important sources of funding for the Brazilian rail sector?
Well, that's interesting. Coming back to our question, I think there's a role for commercial banks, but only after completion, when we have to finance operational expenses. But it's hard to commercial banks to come into the first phase with these high capital investment expenditures and long-term foreseeable future. Now coming back to innovative financial services, I believe perhaps in first hand, Brazil has finally approved its carbon market yesterday in the evening. So I believe having a carbon market would be very important to change relative prices in relation to roads, because as the bill was designed, logistic companies that are mainly owners of trucks would be in the carbon market. So this is perhaps something interesting to foster again railways. And I think this is interesting because perhaps we can design having a mixture of green bonds, having these disincentive to roads, and Brazil needs indeed to de-risk financing in railways, and at the same time we need to have different transport modes, because it's important. For example, now coming back to resilience, we have in Brazil several problems with resilience in roads, like landslides and floods. So it's important to bring the adaptation and resilience to the discussion, and see these as an insurance that railways can bring to our logistics. And I think these carbon credit, bringing resilience as a kind of insurance that I believe it's still important how to better design this idea of prevention as an insurance, how to price it. And I think MIGA, for example, could be very helpful in bringing experience from other countries and help us having this idea of resilience as insurance.
Well, thank you very much. You raised a lot of interesting and important points. I mean, the resilience is one of them, because I mentioned 300 billion investment requirement just to bring freight and passengers from roads to rail. And additional capacity is required to green up the networks, but also create resilience you've been talking about. And Brazilian model is very interesting because it's sort of a crossbreed between public sector and concessions, because the government raises financing for the construction, and once the project is completed, it goes into the concession to auction to a concession to a private developers. So this could be a model for other countries as well. So I'm switching my question to you, Andre. Oh, sorry, to you, Diop. On the concessions, and you mentioned that IFC is helping state-owned companies and governments to structure concessions. And we recently, both MIGA and IFC, supported an interesting concession in Gabon. I mean, of all countries, it's a very challenging investment environment. IFC provided financing, MIGA provided guarantees for private equity investor Meridiam. Do you see this type of concessionary arrangements, or the concession arrangement that Brazil has, to become the most popular models for private sector engagement in the rail, and engagement that enable to bring institutional investors into this sector?
It is possible, although challenging in many of these markets. And where we have succeeded, we've started with freight rail transport first. And the reason being, you have to have basically an anchor investor, or basically you have to figure out where your revenue is coming from. And the railways in Gabon, as in many possible other railways in other countries, tend to be linked to, say, mining freight, high-value freight, right? So mining, minerals, they tend to be the off-takers or the users of the railway systems, and they can pay for the high capex or finance the high capex that's necessary. So we tend to start, or the demand for private sector investment or financing of railways tended to have started with freight transport. Now that makes sense, and these days with the logistics needs of many of these businesses, for not only mining goods but also grains and commodities to transport these, that provides a potential for a private sector financing source. And this is where issuing bonds, green bonds, to decarbonize the sector is definitely a source, because then the purchasers of these bonds, or even the anchors of these bonds, can actually be the users, the commodity users, the mining companies that can help finance these. So we start, the demand has tended to start first with freight transport. And that makes sense because with passenger transport, passenger railway transport around the world has tended to be subsidized by governments. And I think this is where we can help governments think through, is this really the best way to finance? Because most railways in emerging markets that I have worked with even though they are subsidized by the government, tended to be inefficient and are financially unsustainable. And so, in order to be financially sustainable, they need to bring in private investment. But it's a vicious circle. To bring in private investment, you need to get to financial sustainability, and you need to be efficient in your operations, and you need to get to a fare that's actually sustainable. And so government policy plays a key part in getting these railways to sustainability. The government has to be willing to bring in private investment. The government has to either, provide the viability gap financing for the fares, or subsidize the fares, or find sectors or combine sectors, passenger plus freight, that allows the railway to survive. So government policy is definitely very important. But railways play such a crucial part in the integrated transport system of a country, because if railways become safer and more efficient and greener, they can actually, if they work well, and they do work well in many countries, in Japan, in China, in Europe, they work quite well. They can bring the passenger and freight volumes off the roads. Oftentimes, the accidents that happen on the roads are because there's just too much volume, too many passengers, too many people, too much freight on our road system. So if we can bring these volumes off the road system and onto railways, our roads actually become safer and actually less polluted. So railways play a key part. And so I think the financial model for investments in railways have to find a way to incorporate the externalities that most of us actually don't incorporate in financial models, the externalities of pollution, right, and safety risks and health risks. By having all the freight and passengers on roads, we need to incorporate that as positive externalities if we bring them onto the railway system. And this is where bringing these positive externalities into our financial modeling can help in the issuance of green bonds.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. A lot of interesting points, and I think a lot of things I learned from you as well. I think for the passenger rail, I think the critical point is that the risk sharing between the government and the private sector, and anything government can do to help to fund the heavy part of infrastructure that needs to be built, leaving the more lighter part to the private sector, make it more sustainable financially for the private sector to be involved. I think we've seen an interesting models in transport, not in the rail, but in other forms of urban transportation. Just recently, for instance, in Senegal, when the World Bank helped government to finance an infrastructure for rapid bus transport in the city, and issued the concession to a private sector developer for rolling stock only. So they were buying and operating buses and recovering cost of this project through tariff, through the tickets, but they were able to make it financially sustainable because government financed the infrastructure for the investors. Unfortunately, this brings us to the end of our session, but we have with us Nicolas Pelletier, Global Transport Director from the World Bank, who will be providing closing remarks to our session. And hope you heard all of our conversation here.
Thank you very much, Elena. So I'm very glad that we're having that conversation about railways in the context of the COP. One reason is that promoting rail transport is key to decarbonizing the sector and to achieve our climate goals. Rail is highly energy efficient. You heard it during this panel. And Elena, I think you mentioned that in your opening remarks. The main climate benefits of railways come from shifting transport from less efficient modes, such as roads and air, to rail. And that can reduce emissions by at least 70% per ton kilometer or per passenger kilometer. So a very significant impact. As we've heard today, rail offers numerous benefits, including driving economic development and supporting high-volume industries. However, rail infrastructure is capital-intensive, and many projects face significant financing challenges. A major opportunity for closing this financing gap lies with commercial sources, including green bonds and loans. To access these, railways need to be creditworthy. Government and railway companies must work together to make railways more financially sustainable. This can be achieved through improving corporate governance and transparency to reduce risk and attract funding, but also through promoting profitable freight services to boost revenue, to ensuring stable government funding for loss-making services through clear contracts, and leveraging land value for transit-oriented development to attract private investment. When these conditions are met, the World Bank and partners are ready to support railway programs. In fact, the number of rail investments that we finance has increased in recent years, driven by the renewed focus on logistics post-COVID. We are currently supporting rail programs in countries like Serbia, Turkey, Egypt, Iraq, Cameroon, and Tanzania. With our IFC colleagues, we also have an active dialogue in Brazil, where we are working with the authorities on the Ficofiol rail corridor. We are also engaged in discussions with several Central and Eastern European countries on the Middle Corridor, which is a key trade route linking Asia and Europe. One of our flagship initiatives, and I was just presenting this example in another panel, is the India Dedicated Freight Corridor Program, which aims to increase rail's market share for freight from 28% to ultimately up to 40%. This program has successfully combined World Bank lending and MIGA guarantees to mobilize private capital. To replicate successful examples such as this program in India, the MDBs and country clients must explore all possible financing angles. One option is the World Bank Group's new guarantee platform, announced earlier this year, with the objective of boosting the volume of guarantees to $20 billion by 2030. We expect many rail projects to benefit from this platform. The World Bank Group is also exploring how climate funds and carbon markets can support rail development in the future. We are committed to expanding our rail programs because of their significant climate and logistical benefits. That's why we've introduced a new window within our Global Facility to Decarbonize Transport, GFDT. GFDT was created at COP26 in Glasgow 2 years ago, and it's now fully operational. This trust fund accelerates decarbonization investments, and the new rail window will offer targeted support for rail development. We now invite development partners and donors to join us in increasing funding for rail projects. Thank you very much for the good discussion today.
Thank you very much, and thank you to our guests for supporting us on this panel. Thank you.